Well, you know, these documentaries was like it's a really great time for me to look at the outside world and to especially explore territories which used to be behind the Iron Curtain. Suddenly you could go there and shoot stuff, you know. And so I had a lot of unfinished business there myself, you know, in Eastern Europe, Central Eastern Europe. And then after 95, 96, you know, that place became normalized, these places became normalized, and kind of, I'd already said what I'd wanted to say and filmed what I wanted to film. Also, I think there was a kind of revolution in the media, you know, that suddenly, for one thing, the British TV, especially BBC, which was a great source of finance, you know, and a kind of strange gentleman's club that you just needed to meet somebody with a good idea and they gave you a budget to shoot a little documentary. Suddenly it became a corporation, all these TVs, and it became like a pain in the neck to try and raise a budget and convince them that this is interesting. Corporations with focus groups, with like a pyramidal structure, so everything had to be reported to the top. So I stopped having this freedom, you know. I had like 5 years of total freedom when I was making documentaries. I just had such crazy, on the spur of the moment ideas. And I spoke to my editor at the BBC, one or another, but usually it was a particular guy, Nigel Williams, and off I go and shoot, you know. And it was like a utopian conditions. Not much money, but enough to shoot. Suddenly, from '95 onwards, the TV world changed. Also, just the world changed. People suddenly, you know, with change to digital technology, everything was being filmed all the time. You know, and suddenly there was like a saturation of coverage of everything. And that kind of approach I had, I was shooting on 16mm, you know, just being very selective, looking from a certain angle in a certain light, certain elements of the truth rather than covering it in kind of media way. Suddenly that became really difficult and tricky. And so there was a kind of wind of change. And also, you know, I age, kids, and blah, 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 so I didn't, you know, documentary, you go out and disappear for a long time, whereas, so it is a good moment to move to storytelling and to kind of look less outside, more into yourself, you know, and stuff you remembered, you cared about, things from the past, books sometimes. So that was the moment. But I didn't do such a radical shift because my first fiction films were very simple stories told with the texture of the real world, you know. So I didn't like the kind of plots of movies or TV movies. I liked very simple plot but with interesting, dense characters, but a kind of plot which would allow you to be to shoot it interestingly, authentically, expressively, rather than a plot which you just had to cover, you know. So my first film that was kind of fiction was something called Twockers, which we shot with a friend of mine for very small budget on an estate in North England. And we shot it very adventurously in static shots, you know, everything kind of happens without camera moving. And the story, and people didn't quite know, is it documentary, is it fiction? Because the performers, the actors were non-actors, you know, the people we found over a long period of research. And the story was kind of a very simple plot. But it was a kind of good way to move from this kind of language to narrative language. And then, you know, the next film was Last Resort, which again had sort of documentary texture, I suppose, but yeah. Anyway, so I made a very complicated answer about a simple question, but basically I moved because I was finished with documentaries. It was difficult to raise the money, and also I just got interested in a different sort of storytelling. Yeah. The thing is, I didn't really want to show a sociological phenomenon. It was kind of a story about a mother and kid, you know, which is. It was quite a personal story about this mother and kid who, you know, arrive in a foreign country where they don't know how it all works. but I imagined it set in a slightly futuristic environment. You know, I thought, okay, the way things are going, there will be such places like this fictitious town where it's all set. Actually shot it in Margate, but we called it Stonehaven or something. So I was thinking, you know, let's kind of imagine what it would be like in 10 years, you know. And the funny thing is that very quickly reality caught up, and that kind of place became quite normal. I mean, quite common. So I don't know whether I anticipated. I just didn't want to reflect the reality as it was. It's always quite good to either go back in time or go forward in time for your imagination to start working. But paradoxically, it became quite realistic, like 3 or 4 years later. Poland my past is in Poland, you know. So maybe that's one of the reasons that I had all these stories from the past, but were kind of personal and part of my baggage, but maybe that's one reason. Another reason is the fact that I don't know how to deal with the present anymore. You know, I have no kind of hook on it. It's just so fluid and it's the liquid world. You know, I just don't have a dramatic handle on it. I'm slightly horrified by it. I don't know how to do it interestingly. You know, so for me, to go back, it helps me kind of see humanity the way I connect with it. You know, the humanity before the digital revolution, before this kind of information took over the world. So it's a kind of an escapism in a way. You know, I'm just escaping to a world that's simpler and where you could tell human stories more graphically.